save the other one or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure this out. Hold on.
Save the other one or what?
I'm muting myself.
Okay.
All right. So here we go.
Well, everybody, this is a day where most people are outdoors enjoying themselves.
Truly, sorry. It's a beautiful day. It's just the kind of day you want to spend outside. So
Well, the reason I said that, Tim, I noticed on our Ollie class programs, usually the attendance is up in the 60, 100 area. But today, I noticed the classes are way down.
yeah, well, people.
Larry, you didn't make that. Yeah, I know, they're outdoors. Anyway, I'm going to shut my video off because I'm munching on lunch.
Okay. And I'm just going to apologize ahead of time. I may get a phone call in the middle of this that I have to take because it's dealing with my homeowner's insurance, because they paid my homeowner's insurance premium twice. And I'm trying to get it straightened out. So
Well, tell them you're happy to take back your,
well,
the dividend. That'll be fine.
that's it. But I got to talk to the agent. But so she's supposed to be calling me, and I don't know when that's going to be. So if it comes, I'll step out for a second and take the call. So anyway, it's just been an interesting morning because I found out that they took the deduction out twice. Why did they do that? I don't know. Somebody made a mistake somewhere. That's all I can say. And then I tried to sign into this, and it says that the Zoom was busy because the rabbi had something going on. And so at first I thought, okay, that's it. We're not going to be able to, but he must have finished just a minute or two ago. So here we are. Is everybody ready for Passover? I guess some people are getting small groups together for Passover if everybody's been vaccinated.
What are you guys doing?
Oh, we're just going to do our own little thing. You know, we used to have a group of people, many of them came from out of town, but it's just not safe to do that yet. So, you know, because we used
Passover and July 4th, you'll be able to celebrate Passover.
That's what Mr. President Biden told us pretty much. So, yeah, we would have about 8 people coming in from out of town for Seder. We used to have it yearly, but we obviously didn't do it last year, and none of us felt it was safe enough to do it again yet. So we'll see. You know, it's too bad.
Any further word on the temple as far as them opening up services?
It looks like it's going to be April some point. They're going to do Friday night, a couple Friday nights first, just to kind of get a sense of how it's working. And then if they can iron out all the kinks on a couple of Friday night services, then they're planning I think in May at some point to start back with Saturday services. But it will be limited spaced seating. I don't know if they're going to have people call in to say they're coming and like reserve or something. I don't know if they've figured that quite all that out yet, but they've figured out how to space people in the sanctuary so that there's distancing, and of course, you know, masks will be required of everybody. And I don't think they'll allow, I know they're not going to allow just tourists or visitors like we used to, you know, encourage people who were in the city just walking around if they wanted to come in. That won't be happening. It's going to be congregants only. I mean, if congregants have family and stuff in town, that's fine, but just not random people coming off, you know, the streets of Savannah. Plus, we got to keep everybody safe. So at least it's a start. It's going to begin. We'll be somewhat back to normal, maybe somewhat back to normal. All right, well, let's get started here on this beautiful day. Sun shining, warm temperatures. This is kind of like what we wait for. And we're lucky that we get it a little bit earlier than a lot of the rest of the country does. So, hopefully spend some time taking in some fresh air at some point today. So we are, this week, we come to the end of the book of Exodus. And we'll be starting the book of Leviticus next week. And we end this week with a double portion. It's two portions together that brings the book of Exodus to a close. Finally, after all the details of the tabernacle is going to finally be built here. The priestly vestments are going to be made, and the high priest will be installed and with their duties. The Israelites are now going to have with them going forth a physical reminder of God's presence, and that will be accompanying them at all times. God has shown that God is merciful. He's, after the indiscretion with the golden calf or golden bull, as we discussed last week, and God indicates that he approves of the finished product of the building of the tabernacle by descending upon it in fire and in the form of a cloud. So that is God giving his, stamp of approval with the work, the handiwork of the Israelites. And God, though God himself, herself, however you think of God, God without gender, whatever, is now going to be maintaining a very tangible presence for the people. So this combined portion has one of the key hallmarks of what we know about our Torah, and that is repetition. These portions, the two double portions here, have a great deal of repetition of everything that we've been told already in earlier portions in the book of Exodus. So the description of the tabernacle is reiterated, the description of the priestly vestments are reiterated, and it's almost an exact word for word repetition. Sometimes the repetition in the Torah is not a word for word repetition, but in this case, there's very little variance between when we were described the first time and when it was described the second time. So it's almost exact. This leads a lot of Torah scholars to believe that the two writings were woven together into one. There were two that wrote, but it was woven together into one narrative because it is so precise, it is so exact, and it does not have a great deal of deviation. So at this point in our Torah narrative, we can look back and we can ponder, as we look at the whole book of Exodus as it comes to an end, we can ponder the wondrous story of what has transpired so far among our people. We think about it, we sort of began with one family, that's it. There was just one. That's the beginning of Judaism. And it all began with Abraham, and it began with Abraham's family. It was passed down then, it grew as Abraham's sons and Abraham's grandsons and great-grandsons. Then we witnessed Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, and they've all had their own personal encounters with God. Then we witness a whole group of people who then become enslaved to a pharaoh, a sort of pharaoh god, because remember, the pharaoh was a god in Egyptian thinking. So this pharaoh god of another people became their lot to become enslaved. And then through Moses, our great leader, these very same people who are enslaved encounter God and God's power, as do the Egyptians, but in a far more troubling way. And then this power finally leads them from slavery to freedom, which is the major theme of Exodus, and of course, the theme of where we are coming upon with our Passover Seder. And this is the story that we do retell year after year after year, every time we sit down to celebrate the Seder and we celebrate Passover. But freedom is really not the result here, nor is it the end of the story. As Moses leads the people on their wandering through the desert, they are in the process of becoming a nation. And it is going at times be a painful process, but what began with one family has now grown to be an entire people, an entire nation. The building of the tabernacle in this portion is a way to cement that peoplehood, something very concrete. There is now something to ground the Israelites and their covenant with God. There is now a place for them to pray and a place for them to gather. The wandering is not over. We know that, for we're going to continue the wandering as we move into the further books of the Torah. But from this point in the narrative, the wandering sort of now takes on a different tone than it had earlier. There is a greater understanding among the people of just who they are and the God that they serve. And what was rather sort of nebulous at first has become something far more real and far more concrete. What has happened to the people up to this point in our Torah narrative of the Jewish people still profoundly affects us today as modern Jews. It is from this amazing Exodus story that we as a people derive our love of and our quest for freedom. This desire to be free will occur again and again throughout our history, and it is not something that we let go of. Quite the opposite. We cling to it, we work for it, no matter what the cost, and sometimes the cost is very, very high. And throughout the ages, we have always managed to survive, even when the odds were most clearly stacked against us. It is also from this Exodus story that we take our steadfast belief in treating the stranger with kindness and dignity and respect. We recall our own oppression, and we move forward from that oppression with a resolve that it shall not happen to other people. We cannot tolerate sitting back and just watching any other people suffer oppression, and these are traits that are still keys to defining Jewish philosophy today. As a wandering people thus far in the narrative, there's been little time to rest and little time to create. One of the Torah commentaries mentioned that as groups of people who leave behind a great deal of cultural artifacts and artwork, not true at this point in our history. We didn't have time for that. We were too busy escaping. We were too busy moving on. This tabernacle and these priestly vestments in this portion are one of those first things that shows a sort of beginning of a cultural flourishing among the Jewish people. Survival at this point is what motivated what happened up to this point in the narrative. Yet when people are asked to donate to help create something beautiful to represent God in their midst, the people don't hold back. And in fact, they donate more than is needed. Moses at one point asked say, we got it, we got enough. We don't really need any more. You were very generous in what you gave us. So unlike Christianity, where we see these grand paintings and these frescoes of religious scenes and religious art, we really don't have something like that in Judaism that rivals all of this Christian art. Part of this is, of course, due to the prohibition on idolatry, but it's also because as a people, we were really preoccupied with moving forward toward a nationhood and toward freedom. There was not time to ponder. There was not time to sit down and create pretty things in our history. Not yet. We were too busy formulating a set of values that we could live by. It would not be until more recent times that anything resembling religious visual art would become a part of Jewish identity. I mean, now you look at any Judaica store and you see beautiful, wonderful creations of ritual items. But that's something that is really fairly new in Judaism. Exodus closes on a note of triumph, and it closes on a note of hopefulness. Getting there was not an easy journey, but God has renewed his covenant with his people, and the people have renewed their faith in the Almighty. There will still be troubled times, and there will still be barriers on the road ahead. We know that in our Torah, that it's still not going to be, just smooth sailing. But for at least a moment, we can stop and revel in all that has been accomplished by our ancestors up to this point in our ongoing Jewish narrative. So that's kind of where are some things I pulled out as I was looking at this. And now I open it up to everybody else who comment, questions, ideas. It's whatever you'd like to throw at me or throw at somebody here. You got a baseball shirt on, throwing there. There's the metaphor, baseball. Everybody's quiet today. There we go.
All right, I'll start, Tim.
Okay.
I'll throw something out there.
Sure.
You had mentioned about going to the gift shops and buying stuff now, which they didn't have in those days, right?
Right.
But nonetheless, there does seem to be a tremendous emphasis on the Bezalel craftsperson coming in here and, all the fine jewelry and, all the details and making of it. It seems to me that, the emphasis there is almost like you go into, a fine church, for example, and you see, the people are starving and yet, they're putting a lot of money into all of the accoutrements and all of the symbols and things like that. Do they comment on that? Do you have any comments there of why, they wanted such fine craftsmanship, such, tremendous jewelry, the gold and all of the other things to be done? I mean, it's a place where not that many people go, right? I mean, it's you're going into the Holy of Holies. Not many people even see these things.
Right. I think there are a couple things and a couple of different commentators that I was reading. Some of it is, of course, it was supposed to be gorgeous and beautiful and intricate because it was meant to represent God. It was supposed to be some tangible, presence. I mean, we can't see God. We can't touch God. We don't give God bodily. We don't anthropomorphize God in Judaism. But still, something that represents God should be done with the utmost craftsmanship and some element of beauty. And so since this was going to be the reminder of God's presence when the people would see it, it needed to be done in a very, very beautiful way. And one of the rabbis was saying that had we remained as a people, had the temple never been destroyed, had there never been the destruction of the temple, and so we would have remained Temple Judaism versus Rabbinic Judaism, there may have been a much longer tradition of these kinds of beautiful items being created. But when the temple was destroyed and the whole cult of sacrifice, we don't have it anymore. We don't have these high priests, carrying out these various rituals in the temple. It sort of just took everything down to the most basic level. I mean, you look at Judaism and you look at the practice of Judaism as it became rabbinic, and we weren't adorning our buildings. We weren't adorning them in the way that Christians were adorning their churches. Early synagogues, for the most part, from what we know, were fairly simple. They weren't, elaborate. You look at these great cathedrals in the cities of Europe, and the spires reaching as far into the sky as possible. And as you said, the people could be starving, but there was a lot of gold and a lot of silver in the ritual objects that you would see in the cathedrals and the churches. And I mean, even looking at the clothing that the bishops would wear and the Pope would wear, etc., was always very, very ornate. But that tradition seemed to have, when this destruction of the temple hit, that sort of died in Judaism. And things went back to a very simple nature. As I said, the idea of creating beautiful ritual objects for Judaism came a little later. Interestingly enough, one person I read, and so you can only take it as one person's opinion, credits Reform Judaism with a great deal of being the impetus, because when people began to build Reform synagogues, temples, whatever, then they wanted these places to be places that would be beautiful and would have some sort of way to rival the Christian churches and the Christian cathedrals. And as we know, if you've seen synagogues in different places, some look very, well, for lack of a better word, look very churchy.
Like ours.
I mean, look at Mikveh Israel. I mean, you have no idea. I mean, when we were having tourists, when we were still open for tourists, in the gift shop, in the museum, and the sanctuary was open, you have no idea how many times we would get calls in the office and somebody would say, well, I'm trying to find you and I can't find you. And so we would try, be helpful, get directed. Where are you? Well, I'm on Monterey Square and I'm standing in front of this church. And we're like, no. You're actually, if you look above the door, just look above the door, and you will see the Star of David above the door. This is the synagogue. You're here. You found us. You just need to come around to the side, ring the bell, and we will let you in. We would get calls like that several times a week, where people didn't realize that they were actually at Mikveh Israel. And I know that when I studied at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, we went to a bar mitzvah at, they call it Plum Street Temple because it's on Plum Street in Cincinnati, but that's not the official name of the congregation. I don't remember. Is also, and in fact, it sits catty corner from the cathedral of the diocese down there. So you have the cathedral on one corner, you have Plum Street Temple on the other corner, and it is a building as magnificent to rival the cathedral. It's just as, it's like Mikveh Israel. I mean, it's got steeples, it's got the whole thing, So it was later on when Judaism began to craft, beautiful ritual objects. I mean, you look now at, menorahs and you look that you can get for Hanukkah. Yes, there's still simple ones out there, but they're extremely beautiful. Look at mezuzot. I mean, mezuzot can be absolutely stunningly beautiful. Even the way a talit can be put together, is not just something simple, but now can be a sort of work of art in and of itself. So we've moved into an idea of, yes, we can surround ourselves with things of beauty, and that can be part of our ritual and part of our religion as well.
That was one of the reactions, obviously, of the Protestant church, right? When they separated, they wanted more simplicity and less ornamentation, and not all of the accoutrements, let's say, that they had in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the name, the Puritans, the whole idea was to purify the church, and purifying the church meant getting rid of all of the ornamentation. I believe, if I remember correctly, the only thing that in the Puritan church was the pulpit and the seating for the people. I mean, they wouldn't even have a cross. Even a simple cross was not part of the decor, because you weren't supposed to focus on things. You were supposed to focus on the word of God, and anything that distracted you. And I will tell you, and if you're in some of these very ornate churches, I mean, I was in a Greek Orthodox church for a wedding one time, and I'm going to be very honest, I spent so much of the time just looking around at all of these beautiful icons and things that were on the walls and all of that, because there's so much to look at. And since they were doing the ceremony in Greek, I couldn't really understand anyway. So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, there is a
Tim,
train of thought that, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, David.
There is a train of thought. I have some issues with it, but I was told that that one of the reasons that we were as Jews not ornate for thousands of years was that we were that people the Jews were fearful that that our Christian neighbors would hurt us if we did show that we were ostentatious or rivaling their religious beliefs.
Could be.
We would be if we were just bare bones. We could do our davening without the Christian neighbors and the power base being resentful of us and letting us and having a program or whatever.
Well, I think there's probably some truth to that. I mean, we kind of tried to, in many places where we knew that sometimes there could be great hostilities against Jews, you try to fly under the radar, I guess, for lack of a better word. Don't be noticeable. Don't, just sort of, do your thing, do it quietly, don't call attention to it. So I think what you're saying is probably in many cases and in many areas where there were Jewish settlements, Jewish communities, let's just keep quiet. Let's not call attention to ourselves. So probably some very, very real truth to that argument, for sure. Jeff, did you want to throw in something here?
He's on mute.
Jeff, you're muted and you're stuck. You look like you're frozen. It looks like
I'm sorry, I did. Right.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm back on.
Okay.
And now? Yeah, fine.
Good. I can hear you now.
Yeah. Floss brought in dessert for me, so I had muted it. Okay. Anyway, our temple, if I remember right, was, the reason it looked was of it.
You're kind of
I-
fading
I-
out. Yeah.
I can't hear.
Drill in. Okay, it's probably my location. Yeah, not as good a connection here. Any better now?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Yeah.
No?
No, it's better.
Okay, yeah, I'm moving closer. Yeah, I'm moving closer to I was at the far end of the house. What I was basically saying, our temple was built by the same architect who built the cathedral in Savannah.
Right.
And what you can tell though who had the big budget to work with.
Right.
So anyway, when I've taken my Christian friends to our services, they always remark how comfortable they feel in the building and during the services. They said it kind of feels like at home.
Right.
And I said, well, I can understand that completely.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely has, I think someone who's Christian would look at Mikveh Israel in our sanctuary and certainly say, it has a lot in common with a church, specifically very much, maybe more of a Catholic church even, Episcopalian as well. So it is more, I mean, I've been in other synagogues that are very different from Mikveh
Oh,
Israel.
yes.
I mean, my synagogue in Ohio was this sort of 1960s modern sort of angled, weirdly kind of constructed building. Pretty in its own way, but nothing to rival Mikveh Israel, and certainly nothing that rivaled many of the churches that were in the community. So it was certainly not ostentatious in a churchy way, that's for sure.
Well, in the Philadelphia area, I mean, you have an example of Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture. He did a temple there, which is magnificent. There are some really outstanding works of architecture now within the country, within temples. They've gone a lot fancier over the years.
Right. They have, right.
I just wanted to get back to, maybe I didn't state it as much as I wanted to correctly, but the Torah reading, God's instructions, if we believe it's God's instructions, on all of the gold and, the elaborateness with which he wanted the original temple to be built. Why? I mean, he wanted it to be a nice place, obviously, but why go through all of that? I mean, the people are in the desert, and who knows what they have, but he's got to have all these particular kind of jewels and things like that. It just seems like he's setting an example that he wants a shrine to himself. It seems a big ego. I guess, does God need that big an ego? Especially years and years later, I was reading about Samuel, and Samuel kind of comes into prominence one time when the Jews have lost, some battles, and they've lost for a while. I think they've lost the Ark of the Covenant. And Samuel says to him, you don't need the Ark of the Covenant because God is with you. He doesn't only reside, it's this whole concept. You don't need a house only where God will reside. He resides every place.
Right, right.
So it's kind of the whole idea that you don't need this one special place where you have to go.
No, and traditionally, if you look at really Judaism, you don't have to have a synagogue really necessarily at all. I mean, a service can be held anywhere. And as you said, we're supposed to believe that God is all around us, no matter where we are. Whether you're at home, if you're shopping at Kroger or whatever, God is there. So why do we have to, and I agree with you, why was God so adamant on having something so ornate and so, ostentatious, if you want to use that word. And was it an ego thing? And I mean, I'm not going to speak for God, that's for sure, but it does seem to set a sort of weird example. And yet there are some rabbis or Torah scholars who claim that the way that it's described in the Torah, there was no way they could have made it like that. That people wandering in the desert, who had left Egypt and are moving and moving and it's supposed to be portable so that they can pick it up and carry it. Well, there are Torah scholars who say that the way it's described, there's no way that it could have been made that way. And if they had made it that way, there's no way it would have been portable. They would not have carry
it. It also, someone was telling me once that in what you just said about Samuel, and beforehand, when we talk about the Porsche for this week, it shows the evolution of Judaism from being
Why did you?
How can I put it? We've talked about it before. It's been a while. Tim, help me out.
I'm not sure where you're going, or I would.
Okay.
I mean, Judaism.
When we were in the desert, we needed a big, ostentatious building or monument, and the Torah comes and little by little, we do not need that building, that centralized house of God, but God is everywhere. I'm making no sense whatsoever. I understand.
I think what we're questioning is at the beginning. Okay, so we're at the beginning here, and we've had the whole issue with the golden calf and the anger that Moses expresses, and God's ready to just wipe his hands, and Moses says, please don't do that, and so God is merciful, and so the people need some sort of physical reminder of God's presence is the way I look at it, and I could be way off base here. But
thank you.
The idea is that the people, not God, the people need a physical presence to remind them of God, that God is there, God is with them all the time. And I guess in a way, synagogue buildings and church buildings and whatever, you pass a house of worship, and it's a reminder of God if God isn't in your brain at that point. So they need something. But did it need to be something, especially where as wandering people in the desert, nomadic people, did it need to be something so ornate? Did it need to be something so, impressive if it's going to be going from point A to point B and point B to point C, and you're going to carry it and it's going to be with you? It would seem like something a little simpler, something a little less, might have been just as good. I mean, I don't know. I mean, could it have been a simple wooden structure of some kind that might have been a lot easier to take with them rather than something so ornate and so decorated? So as Larry was saying, why did God have these, it's got to have the gold and it's got to have this and whatever. As I said, I can't speak for God. I don't know why God would want something like that.
Tim, what else is in, is this the end of the book of Exodus now, this double portion?
Yes,
and is it double portion now only because of the particular year that we're in, or is it always a double portion?
It's not always, no. It depends on how the year and the weeks of the year go. So some years it is a double portion, some years it's not, no.
So how does it end now, the book of Exodus?
It ends where they have, after talking about it and giving us the descriptions, where the two craftsmen actually do build. So there is actually the physical tabernacle has actually been constructed. God comes out the very end of the portion. God basically, as I said, shows some element of approval of what they've built, because he's either represented by a cloud that goes over the top or by fire that is over the top of the tabernacle, which is his way of saying, okay, I'm pleased with what you've done. I'm pleased with the work. I'm pleased with the craftsman. And that's kind of where we end. And then we have this, and we're going to go into Leviticus. And what's interesting is, okay, so we get to this point in the narrative of the Jewish people. And okay, so they've got their tabernacle. They've had their issues with the golden calf. They've renewed their covenant with God. So all is good. And now we're going to take a stop, because Leviticus does not really advance the narrative. Leviticus gets all into codes and laws and rules and all of that. And we then pick up the narrative once we pass Leviticus.
And the narrative that we pick up is Moses is told, he's not told in Exodus. I didn't remember that, whether or not he's going to be the leader or he's not going to be the leader.
That does not
that has not happened yet.
No, that's going to occur once we pass Leviticus, where God will be angry and say, you'll be able to see it from the top of the mountain, but you're not going to be able to enter the promised land, which is a pretty steep price to pay. And remember that Deuteronomy, or the final book of the Torah, is basically a retelling of the whole Torah again. Yeah. And it's mostly, in Hebrew, it's called Devarim, which means words. And it's mostly, a good part of it is Moses speaking to the people. Moses' words reminding them, this is where you came from, this is who you are, this is how we got here. And remember that when we get to the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses has his death, he creates this grand poem that he recites for the people before passing away, and that's the end of it, and the Torah comes to an end, and you could almost imagine a choir of angels singing as Moses dies or something. But we're going to, what's interesting though is we've got this book now right in the middle that's just going to stop the story, and then we pick the story back up once we pass Leviticus. But I think it's interesting that it ends the way it does at Exodus, because it ends at a point where everything is good. God is pleased again. Moses, has been able to get the people to renew the covenant with God. The tabernacle's been built. God is pleased. So you have this sort of, if you think of it like almost like there's going to be an intermission in the movie, the intermission ends at a point where everybody can walk out to get the popcorn and feel good about what they just saw.
And the celebration of Passover, is that not mentioned at all in Exodus?
Oh no, there has been talk that the Exodus has already talked about the remembering of the spring holiday of the Passover. Yes, that has occurred. Yes,
and that becomes one of the 613 commandments. Then is to celebrate the Passover Seder.
Right, that and the commandment also to eat matzah.
And to eat matzah. Okay.
And to eat matzah. People forget that it's actually a commandment to eat matzah. Doesn't say how much you have to eat, but it is a commandment that you have to eat matzah sometime during Passover. Some people eat lots of matzah, some people not so much, But, so yes, we already know that this is going to be, we've already been commanded that this is something that we must do, will become one of the major holidays on the Jewish calendar, that we will retell this story of the escape from slavery again and again and again, and it becomes part of the key part. As I said, two of the major values of Judaism, the idea of valuing freedom, which is a key Jewish value, and the idea of treating strangers, all come out of the whole Passover story. Remember you were slaves, so don't treat people the way you don't want to be treated, which is repeated 42 different times in the Torah, to treat the stranger well. It's one of the key values that, as I said, as modern Jews, we still live by the idea of welcoming the stranger and trying to make people feel that they matter, that they're a part of the greater community or whatever. So, in Exodus really is centralized to the whole narrative of the Jewish people, because it really has fashioned so much of the way we think and so much of Jewish philosophy.
So just in terms of the holidays now, Passover is usually in the spring, April.
Right.
We don't really have anything over the summer of significance, do we? Until you get to,
No, you do.
Shavuos.
Yeah,
Shavuos.
Shavuos is like end of spring, early summer, depending on, the calendar for the year. Usually May, mid-May, end of May. So it's still spring. But it's toward the warmer part of spring as we're moving towards summer. But in the heat of summer months, as we see them, we don't really have a major holiday. We get then to the month of Elul, which is supposed to be contemplative and preparing for the high holy days. We do have Tisha B'Av, which is remembers the destruction of the temple and the fast and
Right.
whatever. But
Comes
in
in
terms of
August.
major holidays, we kind of June, July, and August are usually pretty bereft of any of that. And I don't know if any of you've looked at the calendar, but you do realize that in the upcoming year, Erev Rosh Hashanah is Labor Day.
Wow.
oh,
Yes,
that's early.
yes,
Wow.
yep. Yes, so if you'll have your Labor Day picnic during the day, and you'll be going to synagogue in the evening. Well, hopefully we'll be back and going to synagogue in the evening, pandemic willing. So yeah, I was looking at the calendar. I was looking ahead the other day, and I I made the pronouncement to everybody. Everybody, look at your calendar, because the Rev Rosh Hashanah is the evening of Labor Day. So it is early. It's where it's supposed to be on the Jewish calendar, but in terms of our calendar, our rabbi used to get so upset when he'd say, people say it's coming early. No, it's coming right when it's supposed to come. On the Jewish.
Right.
People say, oh, Hanukkah's early this year. No, Hanukkah's right where it's supposed to be.
Supposed to be,
No,
right?
it's Labor Day is late.
Labor Day is late. Yeah, we could only wish, but no, it's really, we're still gonna be in the real heat of a Savannah summer when we get to Rosh Hashanah this year. So, but yeah, we have, as we end Exodus, I always feel like there's sort of like take a deep breath at this point at the end of Exodus. And as we move into then, the laws and things in Leviticus, I was reading ahead, as I frequently do, and I was reading a rabbi who was talking about how Reform Jews especially wish we could just skip the book of Leviticus, that we could just go right over it and gloss over it and move beyond, because Reform Jews have a rather, excuse me, I have to take this call, so I'll be back in just a second. So you can talk among yourselves. I'll be right back.
Larry,
Yes.
do you remember the film? I don't remember who did the documentary, but if I remember right, that in the Orthodox community, they're trying to rebuild the temple in Israel.
It's
Yeah.
actually not. It's not the Orthodox. It's actually one part of the Orthodox, but mostly a lot of Jews for Jesus. There's a lot of
No, that wasn't the group. That wasn't
Okay,
the group
was-
I'm talking about with the
Okay.
documentary film. This was I believe a Hasidic group.
Hasidic group. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think we talked
Do you
about
remember
that
that
with the
film,
rabbi.
Larry?
Yeah, I don't remember the film, but we talked about that with the rabbi, and we even mentioned that when we were in Israel, we went over there in the Tower of David, and they had certain people, certain very Orthodox people who were awaiting the Messiah, and they were, preparing all kinds of robes and cloth using all the instructions that they could fathom out of the, the Torah, as far as all the details, like the details of, how many jewels are in the high priest's vest and the kind of cloth that is to be used, the colors and things. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't remember the film, but I remember seeing these people actually do it. Yeah. So, yeah, they're waiting for that. They're waiting for,
Yeah, wow, right.
for the opportune moment.
Me too.
Yeah.
I understand they're still trying to raise that perfect heifer. That's also part of the traditional lure.
The red heifer.
Yes, the perfect red heifer.
Yeah.
So
All right, I think maybe we'll just mosey on along and call it a day here.
Okay,
I'm not sure. What were you saying
Tim will
before
come
about going outside, that the attendance is off? At what class did you go to that the attendance was way off?
Well, no, there was a very good class on artificial intelligence this
I meant
morning.
to sit in on it. Yeah, I didn't go to that one. I'll hear the review. I guess they'll tape it or be video.
Yeah, they'll tape it. He's a West Coast professor. I mean, there was some very interesting things in the field, and I tried a couple of things out, and it worked out very nicely. As far as simultaneous translation, with the Google Translate and a few other things on picture searching. But he was talking about different things. It was kind of interesting. And then Flossie's class is the one on poetry and literature. And I noticed when I first tuned in on it, there were only about 18 people there.
Yeah.
Aha. We
Well,
almost left you in the lurch there, Tim.
When you deal with insurance companies and they tell you you're going to call, you don't say no, because especially when it's involving that they took too much money and you want it back. So I'm getting it back. So I won my case. I won my case. They're not arguing with me at all. They're saying you'll have your refund. I'm saying, okay.
Oh, wonderful.
Very
That
good.
So, yeah. That's what I spent my whole morning doing. I've been on the phone, you have no idea how long, trying to get to the bottom of what was happening. So I could breathe a sigh of relief now.
Well, homeowners insurance is a big number down here. At least it is in Sun City. My homeowner's insurance is twice as expensive as my taxes.
Well,
so if I got double billed on that, I'd notice.
Oh, I noticed. Trust me, I noticed it right away. It was like, okay, this is wrong. This is wrong. It's not as expensive. It was more expensive in South Florida, let me tell you, because of hurricanes. We were, it was bad. Anyway, I don't know what you guys were discussing while I was gone. Probably something extremely exciting, and I missed it. But yeah, so we move to next week when we get together. We'll move to Leviticus, and it will be interesting to see things that we come up with. There are troubling things in Leviticus, but I always remember Rabbi. He came a couple of years ago for the anniversary at Mikveh Israel. He was one of the higher ups in the URJ. And he said, there are pieces of the Torah that aren't always the easiest to deal with. They're not the most pleasant to deal with, but they're still part of the Torah, and we still have to deal with it. So
well, you were saying that Reform has some issues with Leviticus. Orthodox and conservative also have not as much problems with it, but they still have problems with it.
Well, maybe we should all get together, and one thing we get Graham, we'll say we're just going to gloss over Leviticus from now on, and we'll just move on. We'll go to Numbers and Deuteronomy, and there you go. I don't know. I don't think we'd probably be able to get away with that, but hey,
we can always try.
But there are parts of the Torah that are troublesome. We know, and we've talked about them in some of the past. How do we? I mean, even some people like Larry Fish would be troubled by the fact that God is so demanding on what He wants us, to build here. I mean, like I said, I don't want to fault God or point fingers at God, but maybe it didn't need to be quite as ostentatious and ornamented as it turned out to be.
I think I mentioned this before, that I kind of like Thomas Jefferson's approach.
Yeah.
And what he did was he went back and he didn't. But he did the New Testament and what he called what's now been called the Jefferson Bible, where he cut and pasted only those pieces that he thought were really relevant in the New Testament, and he created his own Bible. And you could see actually the way he, cut out from his own King James version of the Bible, and he created this much smaller version of the Bible, which just has, what he thought was important and the important parts of it. So, I think we do that anyway. I mean,
right.
Like the holidays come, or we just talked about the, Purim, and we don't talk too much about the slaughter, of the people after Purim or the second part of the Purim story. I mean, so we pick and choose
Of course.
the parts that we want to emphasize, and you kind of downplay the parts that are maybe, more myth or more just, story that we don't really understand, or they just don't appeal to us.
Well, I mean, we've done the whole thing with Hanukkah as well. I mean, we talk about the miracle of the oil, and we stress that miracle as the celebration of Hanukkah when it's really about war, and it's
Yeah.
pretty bloody. But we really, the rabbis, even though it's not a Torah holiday because it's nowhere in the Torah, they didn't really want to stress the idea of we're celebrating warfare. It just didn't sit right with the idea of having a holiday where, that's what we're remembering and celebrating. So let's talk more about a miracle of, having enough oil in the lamp to last for 8 days when it should have never lasted that long. So you can see how there again, it's sort of like, let's just skew away from the uglier part and skew toward, everybody likes the idea of a miracle. Everybody likes the idea of light. That's celebratory, and it's something positive, whereas bloodshed and warfare, not so much.
The rabbi was saying the last 3 or 4 years we're talking about celebrating freedom as opposed to that particular what do they call that lesson, or excuse me, the lamp lighting miracle. So
Right. Well, because
I'm assuming that it's going to evolve again.
Oh, they do. I mean, Judaism is ever evolving. It has evolved throughout, the thousands of years. It will continue to evolve. And yes, I mean, Hanukkah, certainly, religious freedom. Jews could, again, they reclaimed the temple. They can now have their rituals and their way to worship the way they want after it had been defiled by the Greeks. So it can easily be a holiday of religious freedom. It can easily where people are permitted to worship in whatever way they want. So I mean, you can look at any one of I suppose, the holidays and figure out what is in each holiday that is what you particularly, want to commemorate, celebrate, and kind of, brush aside the things that maybe you don't want to commemorate. I mean, it is interesting, though, in the Passover Seder, we every year we reiterate the ugly plagues. We don't just say, well, we're not going to talk about those, we put the little blood on the plates and the whole thing. So, here we're sitting, we're going to have a meal. We're going to talk about frogs and lice and boils and blood and everything. It's not the most appetizing thing in the world, but hey, it was part of what got us out of Egypt. After finally Pharaoh saying, "I've had enough. Get out. Go. I don't want you here anymore." So, I think in life we sometimes would rather remember the things that are positive and kind of not really talk so much about the negative.
On a more pragmatic question about Passover, do you get much shopping done for Passover stuff in any of the supermarkets in and around Savannah? Do you have
the Kroger of the big Kroger?
You get matzo waffle or
Yeah, the Kroger on Mall Boulevard has a pretty extensive kosher for Passover section.
Which boulevard did you say?
The Kroger on Mall Boulevard by the Oglethorpe Mall on off of
Oglethorpe Mall.
It's not as good as well stocked as it has been in years past.
Which is really odd because you would think, knowing this year more people are not necessarily going to be having large community seders, that people needing things at home. Publix, somebody told me Publix is very small this year. They really
very small. It is very small. You can actually I missed it 3 times before finding out where it actually is. It's a very small little piece of in Publix.
Yeah, I know that it's a little bit bigger at Mall Boulevard, but Caleb, who works there, said it's not as much as they've had in the past, but you can get most of what you need there. They don't have a lot of certain things, so if you don't get in there in a timely manner, every year they have matzah left over after. There's usually, I mean, sounds crazy, but last year after Passover was finished, they had bags of kosher for Passover potato chips. And they had a lot of them, And they knocked them down to like 39 cents.
And I loved them. I loved it.
They were delicious. I bought a couple bags thinking, I've never had kosher for Passover potato chips. Why not? 39 cents, how bad can they be? So I brought them home. Then I wanted to go back and get more, and they were all gone. Because they were really good, really good. I love the chocolate covered matzah, that Manischewitz, I think, is the one that makes it. But the last couple of years, they have not stocked it. And it's dark chocolate, because I love dark chocolate. They haven't stocked it. I mean, you can make it yourself, but if you want to just have it in the cupboard.
They have dark chocolate, but not chocolate covered matzah. At least not at Publix or at Kroger right now.
No, I know Kroger. I had Caleb look for Kroger, and he said no, they don't have it. But I think it's fairly well stocked. I mean, that you can get pretty much, I think, what you need for a Seder for dinner. We bought like matzah meal and cake meal and stuff like that you can use for baking.
Right, that's what I need.
Okay, I can find out from Caleb if they have it, because he'll know. We have some, interestingly enough, they had a bunch of it. Do you remember Lucky's, the little supermarket? When Lucky's was closing, going out of business, we happened to go in there to see what they had. We were really looking at their wine selection, because they had marked all their wine down. And there was this whole shelf of cake meal, matzah meals, things like that were marked down really, really low. So we bought some then that we still have in the cupboard, because we don't use that much of it. And I guess I think it doesn't go bad, but
Oh.
No, it doesn't.
Pardon me?
On a non-Passover food question, how about Hebrew National salami?
That
they
is
have
Passover.
Well,
It
well,
is kosher.
kosher salami, is there a place that we had heard that Publix was getting them, and we went over to our Publix here in
And he
Bluffton.
yelled at us.
Yeah, the guy says no. He says, I'm tired of answering that question. We're not getting them in. We don't have them. I don't know when they're coming in. But because there's a rumor about Hebrew.
No,
Do you know?
I'll ask Caleb if they've got it at Kroger. They have a fairly, it comes and goes selection of meats and things that are kosher. Whether they have the Hebrew National salami, I'll find out.
Okay.
Because he works there and they know he's Jewish, they come to him with questions about kosher stuff. And
I see.
a couple of times they have put things in kosher. It's like, you can't put that there. You cannot put that there by kosher food. They still had Hamantaschen left from Purim, and they were putting them in the kosher for Passover. It's like, no. Those are not there. Trying to explain to them that the kosher for Passover is different than the rest of the year. They just couldn't comprehend,
It's still there, believe it or not. I was there a couple of days ago. They have a lot of Hamantaschen.
Well, because he's telling them, they said, well, it's Jewish. So they think if it's Jewish, it's automatically okay. And it's like, no, there's a stricter standard for Passover than for the rest of the year. And you're supposed to keep it separate.
But they didn't have anything for Purim. So it's kind of interesting that they didn't have Hamantaschen for Purim, but they have it now.
Well, that's it's like, okay, a little late, but okay, whatever. Well, one year they didn't get their one year Kroger did not get any of their Hanukkah stuff until the 8th day of Hanukkah. So they immediately put it out and marked it down, because who's gonna buy it now? Hanukkah's over. The people who order don't pay attention to the Jewish calendar. They just don't. They should, but they don't. So things don't come on a timely manner for the holidays. They don't look ahead, or consult with somebody, because I remember Caleb telling them, nobody's gonna buy that Hanukkah stuff now. It's the last day. You're gonna have to mark it down, and people will save it for next year, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh well. That's what we are, the minority here, and we just have to deal with it as best we can. So, well,
we're going to sign off, but it was really, really nice talking to you guys.
That's good to talk with everybody.
Go out and enjoy the nice day outside.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get out and do some yard work, because it's
well, now you can celebrate.
And I can celebrate because I got my money straightened out. So yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Right, it's all good.
It's all good.
All right. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Enjoy your
And Flossie says hi, and wanted to pass on our best wishes.
Okay, tell her I said hello and Shabbat Shalom.
I sure will. Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Tim, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been a year, and I do apologize for that.
That's quite all right.
I loved doing it after services.
Right.
I miss it. So
We all do. We all do. We're all waiting to get back into the sanctuary, that's for sure.
I hope Caleb, say hi to Caleb for me.
I will.
And a year late, but I appreciate you hooking me up with the Seder plates at Kabod.
Oh, very good. Glad to help. Enjoy your weekend. Go out and enjoy some of the beautiful weather we're having.